everyone. I'm Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President for Programs and Strategy here at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much, Ilya. Leonid, thank you not only for your efforts to complete Boris Nemtsov's work, but for your own courage and leadership on these issues. I want to tip my hat to Natalia, who's with us, as well as Sergei Alexashenko, who will join the conversation after our presentation. What we've just heard from Ilya and Leonid is that propaganda has consequences. It's not clear whether Boris's plans to issue such a report played a role in his murder, but this possibility certainly can't be ruled out. I want to turn in this part of our presentation to our own report, Hiding in Plain Sight, Putin's War in Ukraine. As Fred Kemp mentioned at the outset, these reports reflect work that was conducted independently from each other. In fact, we were unaware of the efforts of Boris Nemtsov, unfortunately, until his assassination. But our teams reached a common conclusion. Putin led his nation into war against a peaceful neighbor and lied to his people. So as we outline key findings from our work, I want to remind everyone who's here to join our conversation and share your evidence of Russia's war in Ukraine using the hashtag #PutinAtWar. And to set the scene for our report, I want to turn to Vladimir Putin and his own words.
Finally, you asked whether our troops are present in Ukraine. I can tell you very clearly, there are no Russian troops in Ukraine.
I can tell you very clearly, there are no Russian troops in Ukraine. This is Vladimir Putin lying to his people. In response to allegations of Russian involvement in Ukraine, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said earlier this year, if you allege this so confidently, present the facts. But nobody can present the facts, he said, or nobody wants to. So before demanding from us that we stop doing something, please present proof that we have done it. And when the U.S. government did this, he retorted with the reply that these are just images from computer games. Russian government officials have sought to discredit information released by NATO or the U.S. government as a smear campaign. It's been part of a concerted propaganda campaign. It's hybrid warfare to sow confusion and encourage or justify ambivalence in the West's response to the conflict. Yet the evidence, as we've heard from our colleagues, is simply hiding in plain sight. So we thought the best antidote to this misinformation is simply to show the truth. So we took Minister Lavrov up on his challenge to present the facts. And what we've also produced is this in a body of research here, we produce it for a more compelling reason. If the international community can't distinguish fact from fiction, or chooses not to do so in public, it's unlikely to coalesce around an effective strategy both to support Ukraine and to deter Mr. Putin. This report is our effort to offer some clarity. We set out to tell the true story of Russia's war in Ukraine. This is no civil war. Rather, it's a story of regular Russian soldiers readied for combat at improvised bases along the Russian-Ukrainian border, backed by a steady flow of arms and equipment, and at times supported by cross-border artillery shelling. Our report documents each of these four pillars, each of these four elements. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn to my colleagues, Max Czeperski and Alina Polyakova, who will share one example of each of these to underscore the findings of our investigation. We make this case using only open source, all unclassified material, and none of it provided by government sources. And it's thanks to the work that's been pioneered by human rights defenders and our partner, Elliot Higgins. We've been able to use social media forensics and geolocation to back this up. I want to turn to our own tech-savvy Max to offer a word about the methodology.
Thank you, Damon. Everyone shares. People share pictures from their family trip. People share pictures from the fun time that they have out at night, but they also share pictures from convoys driving through their towns. And we took that curiosity and we matched it up together with the geotags that nowadays are on social media posts. We then used a method called geolocation to cross-verify the geotags. And I'm now going to turn over to Elliot Higgins, who will tell you how we prove that a post was made in a certain location by using geolocation.
This video is from a town called Zores. This is earlier on in the route, and unusually with this one, the person who posted this online gave us the time and the coordinates. So we actually put the coordinates into Google Earth, which you can see here. We kind of rotated the image to make it a bit easier, and then we went through different elements you could see and matched it off. So there's various structures that are visible, and you can see the road layout as well.
There's enough to identify in here to completely match it up.
That's correct.
So as you can see, we match up the posts that people post online with the geolocation information, the geotag, so to speak, and we then go and geolocate that post to really verify that we actually right on that post. So with that, we were able to track military equipment in Russia and follow its path to Ukraine. In one instance, we found a howitzer in Russia near the town of Rostov. An ordinary citizen posted it online. A few weeks later, we saw the same very howitzer all the way just out in the outskirts of Mariupol being caught in an Al Jazeera clip. So you can literally match it like a fingerprint, and you have undeniable proof that there is a Russian military equipment crossing the border. But just the way you're able to trace equipment, you're also able to trace people who post pictures of themselves, including soldiers. So one of the soldiers that we followed on his journey is Boris Nemtsov. We traced his path all the way back to his home region of Buryatia on the Russian-Mongolian border. I'm now going to turn over to Alina Polyakova, who will tell you more about how we then followed his trip. Alina?
Thank you, Max. So from Buryatia, where Bato lives, he traveled 3,000 miles to the eastern Ukrainian border to a training camp near the Russian city of Kuzminka. Training camps such as these have become the launching sites and staging points as the Kremlin prepares for its combat in Ukraine. And now anybody with access to just Google Earth can see that these camps are brand new. So for example, Kuzminki, the camp that I just described, this is what it looked like in 2013, complete empty space. Now just 1 year later, this is what Kuzminki, the camp, looks like now. We see mass buildup of military equipment, barracks, equipment ready to be deployed for the war in eastern Ukraine. And we know that Bato Dambai was there. He took this photo of himself with a husky puppy, and he posted this social media webpage. Now from Kuzminki, we know that Bato was then deployed for fighting in the Donbass. And he traveled all the way from Kuzminki to Debaltseve in February 2015. And it was at this very checkpoint, to these exact coordinates, that we can trace Bato, because he posted a photo of himself again on his Kontakti page. So this is Bato, this is from his social media page, and the coordinates of this are geolocated exactly to the checkpoint I just pointed out. Now Bato was lucky enough to return home to Buryatia, where he has a wife and a 2-year-old son. But many Russian soldiers, as we also heard earlier, have not been so lucky. And indeed, many return home in zinc coffins under the label of Cargo 200. Damon.
Thank you, Alina. So Max and Alina have just illustrated how Russia is at war in Ukraine. Russian citizens and soldiers are dying and fighting in a war of their government's own making. Indeed, Russian forces throughout the conflict have played key defining roles at key moments, from Little Green Men in Crimea to the annexation, to seeding the first violent uprising in Slavyansk, to appointing the political leadership, including a known FSB colonel, to attempting to trigger uprisings from Odessa to Kharkiv in an effort to create Novorossiya. And when that failed, deploying the Chechen Vostok Battalion and amassing troops along the border in advance of Ukraine's historic presidential election on May 25th, just a year ago. And yet it was then, despite that, where Ukrainian forces began to take back territory. And Russia responded to this effort where the Ukrainians almost took back their territory by sending in ever more sophisticated equipment, artillery, tanks, anti-aircraft missiles, including the Buk surface-to-air missile system that we heard about from Leonid, the one that shot down the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 on July 17th. And in response to Ukraine's counteroffensive, Russia resorted to artillery strikes from Russian territory, attacking Ukrainian forces on Ukrainian territory. To document this, let's turn again to Elliot.
What we were looking into were artillery attacks that were reported in the summer of 2014 against Ukrainian forces near the Russian border. There are of these attacks coming from Russia, but there was no real solid proof. So we wanted to see if there was anything behind these claims. What we have here is satellite map imagery from Ukraine. So one thing that's very useful about Google Earth is they buy imagery from different dates. So you can actually go back in time and see what areas looked like at different times of the year. And if we look at the July 16th imagery, which is available freely to anyone on Google Earth, we can actually see these crater fields. And this relates to a reported attack a few days earlier. We examined the craters and figured out the trajectory, and we did this by using established techniques used by militaries across the world, based off the marks on the ground. So what we were able to do was find the average trajectory, and that gave us a bearing that we followed back into Russia, where we found signs of launch sites inside Russia. We can see positions where multiple rocket launchers would have been parked. When these things fire, they leave quite a significant amount of burning in areas where there's crops and grass. And there's only so many vehicles this could be, and many of them in service with the Russian military. So by examining the markings on the ground, we were able to determine the wheelbase of some of these vehicles. And based on the way they were turning, we could calculate that it was likely going to be a Gradle Tornado multiple rocket launcher. We then could overlay that on the site, and we could get a good idea where all the vehicles were positioned and which way they were firing. And this just happened to be pointing exactly to the crater sites inside Ukraine. In fact, in some cases, we were able to find examples where the launches had actually been filmed by people inside Russia. So, for example, we've got videos where there's the smoke from launches. Some videos, there's even the launches actually as they were happening. And these videos were all posted by individuals on different social media accounts. So we know they're from people, different sources, and they were filmed from different locations inside Russia. And what's useful about that is it's actually possible to then find exactly where each video was filmed using a technique we call geolocating, where we use images visible in the video to match it to imagery on the ground. It was possible not only to find the satellite map imagery that matched the reports of the attack, but also videos showing the attack actually happening, filmed by people inside Russia. What we've managed to establish is there were a number of significant gains made by the Ukrainian separatists in the summer of 2014. Many of these sites where there's huge crater fields that have been linked to sites in Russia appear to be linked to those gains. So it does seem that these cross-border artillery attacks, they weren't random acts. The suggestion is that these attacks were part of an organized offensive supported by artillery attacks from inside Russia.
Yet after that attack, Ukraine's counteroffensive continued into August. And it was by mid-August, when Ukrainian forces were on the verge of taking over the smaller enclaves at the time of Donetsk and Lugansk, that regular Russian forces in the thousands poured across to soundly defeat at that time, Ukraine's military. Russia stepped in to assist the so-called separatists when the Ukrainian forces were on the verge of wiping them out. So despite the Minsk ceasefire that then followed that in early September, Russia's resupply continued unabated. Russian-led offensive began to take the airport in Donetsk in December, as you'll recall from those vivid images. And then the effort towards Debaltseve began, a critical railway junction between Donetsk and Lugansk. And it was which led to Minsk II. But it was between the two Minsk agreements when Russian forces captured an additional 500 square kilometers of territory in Ukraine. Indeed, it was only after the February 15th Minsk agreement that the forces took Debaltseve. And since the Minsk II agreement, which is underway right now, We've seen stepped up heavy fighting just as of the past 24 hours. If you look at our Ambassador Pyatt's Twitter account, you'll see live video footage of that. But also the capture of up to an additional 28 villages and towns during the so-called ceasefire. So what do we conclude from all of our work and our looking at this? And the report will go through each one of these areas in far more detail with many more examples. But if you step back, for us, first, there would be no conflict in Ukraine today but for Putin's strategy to provoke one. We don't have a Ukraine problem, we have a Putin problem. Second, the best antidote to this misinformation, hybrid war, is clarity. It's simply speaking the truth. To do otherwise only reinforces Putin's attempt to obfuscate Russia's direct role in the conflict. And that means Western leaders must counter, not abet, Russia's hybrid war with our own language, with what we say. After all, these are a prerequisite for policies that can better deter Russia's aggression. Third, the thing that I've really learned in this process through my colleagues is that social media forensics and geolocation analysis, it's a powerful tool. It's a democratization of intelligence gathering. Information once available only to intelligence agencies is now literally hiding in plain sight for anyone to see. And this matters because it's helped us overcome differences among intelligence assessments as we've seen around the NATO table. It's overcome some of the healthy skepticism among our publics about intelligence after spectacular intelligence failures in the past. You don't need to believe any official. You don't need to believe us. You need to actually take a look yourself. So it's a tool that's out there that we actually don't control. It's a new reality in a world in which individuals and non-state actors can really play a critical role. But fourth, in our view, I think this report serves as a bit of a warning. What's coming next in Ukraine? We're not certain, but we have seen a pattern in which Russia has used the lull in fighting to prepare for a next phase of conflict. And what may be happening is Putin's creating the reality of a separate fighting force so that he can more effectively distance regular Russian forces from the conflict and make the case, if full fighting begins again, that this really is a civil war, regardless of its origins. It is peculiar that now the separatists have more tanks than France, Germany, and Italy combined. We shouldn't fall into the trap of ever thinking this is a civil war. It's also a warning of the impact of what is happening across Europe and Eurasia today. The power of Russia's hybrid war isn't limited to Ukraine. We see a concerted effort to use propaganda, misinformation, and hybrid tactics to like Moldova, Georgia, Kazakhstan, to prevent the inexorable move of some of these countries to the west, as well as what we see playing out in the Western Balkans. But most dangerously, we see some of these tactics aimed at NATO allies and European Union members to divide them by exploiting divisions within our nations and among our allies, and perhaps an ultimate goal of undermining the solidarity that's at the core of our alliance. So therefore, we conclude this with a couple of points that we hope that these reports, that these two reports, that they encourage policymakers to really draw on these insights to inform the decisions that they're taking, to take off the table discussion of curtailing the sanctions and confirm the extension of these sanctions underway on Russia until the behavior is reversed. And perhaps more so to galvanize a more comprehensive transatlantic strategy on how to support Ukraine and deter Russia's aggressive actions. But we do have to remember that Putin has used this crisis first and foremost, as we've heard from our colleagues today, to consolidate his own authority at home, whipping up patriotic sentiment to paper over some of the Kremlin's own failures in governance, and therefore unmasking this deception to his own people, as our colleagues are doing, is a key part of the strategy of hitting back on aggression. And finally, I think we also must remember for us that it's the important takeaway to demonstrate a sense of solidarity with those Russians who are courageous enough to take a stand against the line of the government. It's easy for those of us outside of Russia to do this, but Ilya, Leonid, Sergei, Natalia, they put their own selves at risk by paying tribute to Boris Nemtsov by completing his work. It's a reminder that the first victims of Putin are the people of Russia who deserve so much better. And as Fred began our conversation today, for so long, so many of us associated with the Atlantic Council have worked toward this vision of a Europe whole and free in which Russia would find its peaceful place, its rightful place. And I think while that goal remains further away today than a few years ago, it remains a compelling vision for the future.